My name is Private Kenya Mack, 19 years old, United States Army. At 0200 hours in the suffocating Texas heat, my own stepbrother pinned me to the wall with a screwdriver. My ID, still smeared with blood, unlocked the investigation that would change everything. What would you do if you saw this? Comment below and subscribe for more. My name is Kenya Mack. I was 19 years old, a private in the United States Army, when I learned that sometimes the most dangerous battlefield is the one you come home to. I'd been away at Fort Jackson, enduring the grind of basic training, sleep deprivation, endless drills, push-ups until my arms shook. And yet the moment I stepped back into my father's house in San Antonio, I realized this place had been training me for years in its own way. Not with rifles and rucksacks, but with silence, humiliation, and the constant demand to shrink myself. The Texas summer heat pressed in like a wet blanket that night. Even with the fan overhead rattling on low, the air inside the house was stagnant. My father, Thomas, greeted me at the door with a stiff nod, as if I were an unwelcome guest. Evelyn, my stepmother, swept in with the theatrics of a hostess, her perfume filling the space before her words did. "Kenya," she cooed, wrapping her manicured hands around mine. "We're just so proud of you, honey. Even if you're not built like the others, you've always tried so hard." That was Evelyn. Compliments tipped with poison. She always managed to lace her words with something that would sink under the skin and sting later, when you were alone. My father heard it, but he didn't intervene. He never did. He simply disappeared into his study, leaving me to smile politely, to swallow it down. Then there was Dylan, my stepbrother. He was leaning against the hallway wall, arms folded, a smirk plastered across his face. His eyes were glassy, his shirt wrinkled, his jaw tight with resentment. He didn't have to say anything. The sneer was enough. In this house, he had always been the storm. I was the lightning rod. But the truth is, I had been trained for moments like this. Not by them, though they thought they had broken me, but by the Army. I'd learned how to breathe through discomfort, how to hold my tongue until the right moment, how to observe and record rather than explode. Sergeant Elena Ruiz had drilled that into me during basic. Data is ammunition, Mac. Don't go into a fight without it. So while Evelyn fussed about dinner and Dylan slammed doors down the hall, I unpacked my duffel quietly in the small bedroom that still had the faded floral wallpaper of my childhood. The room hadn't changed since I was 12. But I had. I slipped a black notebook from my bag, the one Sergeant Ruiz had given me. Its pages were already lined with dates, times, small notes written in sharp block letters. That night, I opened to a fresh page and wrote, July 10th, 2115. Evelyn. Not built like the others. Father. No response. Dylan. Intoxicated, hostile stare. It looked clinical. Detached. That was the point. Each entry wasn't just memory. It was evidence. If feelings were fuel, this notebook was a weapon, and I intended to keep it loaded. It wasn't the first time Evelyn had tried to cut me down in front of my father. I remembered Thanksgiving when I was 15. The one where I'd finally had good news to share. An acceptance letter to a summer astrophysics program at the University of Texas. I'd slid the letter across the dinner table, my hands trembling with pride. For a brief, flickering second, my father had smiled at me. A real smile, the kind that made me believe there might still be hope. And then Evelyn read the letter aloud and twisted it into a cruel joke, claiming it was a special needs support camp instead of a program for gifted students. The laughter had rolled around the table, Dylan's loudest of all. My father hadn't corrected her. He'd looked down at his plate, lips pressed thin. That was the moment I learned that silence can wound worse than words. That night, after dinner, he had actually told me to apologize to Evelyn for making a scene. I had done what I always did, gone to my room, torn the letter into shreds, and carried the lesson in my bones. This house does not reward pride, only submission. The Army had been my escape. Out there, your value was measured in discipline, performance, and grit. not in how well you bowed to someone else's narrative. But standing in that house again, hearing Evelyn's syrupy insults and seeing Dylan's smirk, I felt the old pressure pushing down. The difference now was that I had a uniform in my closet, scars on my hands from the rope climb, and a notebook that told me I didn't have to swallow this forever. That first evening back, I said very little. I listened, observed, recorded. Evelyn prattled on about family, friends, and money problems. Dylan muttered curses under his breath. My father vanished into silence. And me? I sat still, writing one quiet line at the bottom of the page. Home is a battlefield. Stay disciplined. Gather evidence. Wait for the order. Because if there's one thing the Army had taught me, it's that you don't waste ammunition on warning shots. You save it for when it matters most. And deep down, I knew. It was only a matter of time before it mattered. The first 48 hours back in that house felt like walking patrol in hostile territory. Nothing came head-on. It was all small, cutting maneuvers, petty sabotage designed to wear me down inch by inch. It began with the shower. I was up at dawn, still on Army time, lacing my shoes for a run when I found the hot water gone. Dylan had been in there first, steam still clinging to the bathroom mirror, humming to himself as if he'd achieved some private victory. I logged it without a word. July 11th, 6:10. Dylan, 35 min shower, water deliberately left running at end. Later, when I sat at the kitchen table with a textbook open, Evelyn leaned over my shoulder with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. So studious, she murmured, setting down a fresh cup of coffee in front of me. A moment later, Dylan stumbled past, hip-checking the table just enough to knock the cup over. Brown liquid bled across the pages, soaking the margins I'd highlighted. He chuckled without apology. Evelyn clucked her tongue as if it were my fault for setting the book too close to the edge. July 11th, 09:35. Coffee spill. Evelyn. No correction. Dylan. Intentional contact. It went on like that. My mail vanished from the hall table. A small cash envelope I'd left in my duffel was rifled through. My laundry, folded neatly the night before, was tossed onto the floor by morning. None of it big enough to trigger an explosion. Just steady attrition, a war of inches designed to break morale. At dinner on the second night, Evelyn chose a different tactic. She waited until my father had set down his fork, until Dylan was already half asleep in his chair from drinking all afternoon. Then she tilted her head, her voice low and syrupy. "Kenya, honey," she said, "your father hasn't been doing well since you left. The doctor thinks it might be serious. Maybe depression." She dabbed theatrically at her dry eyes with a napkin. "He needs help. There's a program, but it's expensive. With Dylan out of work, things are tight. If you could contribute, just a little, it would mean the world to him." Her performance was practiced. The quaver in her voice, the way she angled herself toward my father, as if seeking his confirmation. He didn't meet my eyes. He never did. I kept my tone flat. "What does the doctor recommend?" Her mask slipped for half a second, just long enough for me to see calculation flicker behind her gaze. "A special therapy facility. Wonderful program, but it's thousands." I nodded slowly, expression neutral, and wrote it down later in my notebook. July 12th, 1910. Evelyn. Financial request, no medical documentation. Father, silent. Dylan, intoxicated. The next morning, while the house was empty, I went looking. My father's study had always been off limits. The door kept locked. This time it wasn't. The air inside smelled of stale paper and old cologne. In the top desk drawer, beneath utility bills, I found the truth. A thick stack of collection letters from a casino in Lake Charles, all addressed to Dylan. Behind them, a final mortgage warning from the bank. No doctor's note. No therapy program. Just debts and desperation. I photographed each page with my phone, the click of the shutter loud in the quiet room. Evidence, neatly filed by date. That evening, Evelyn tried again in the kitchen. This time she dispensed with sorrow and went for venom. You think you're so much better than us in your little uniform, don't you? She hissed when we were alone. My phone was already in my pocket, the recorder app running. I didn't answer. I didn't rise to it. I just let her words fill the silence, every syllable captured. July 12th, 22:40. Evelyn. Direct hostility recorded. But it was Dylan who escalated from sabotage to open hostility. I came home from a run the next evening, sweat still dripping down my back, to find him in my bedroom closet. At first, I thought he was just snooping. Then I saw what he held in his hands. My Class A uniform. The one I had pressed and stored in a garment bag. My pride and proof of everything I'd earned. He dragged it out to the backyard, grinning as if daring me to stop him. I sprinted after him, heart hammering, but my father intercepted me at the back door. His hand clamped down on my arm like a vice. "Let him be, Kenya," he muttered, eyes fixed on the ground. "Dad..." I struggled against his grip. "Stop him, please." He only shook his head. "It's just clothes." Just clothes. Dylan was already splashing gasoline over the dark blue fabric, the stench hitting me like a punch. Evelyn stepped outside then, arms folded, lips curled in satisfaction. The match flared small and bright in Dylan's fingers before he tossed it down. The fire leapt instantly, ribbons curling into black slag, brass buttons popping like gunfire. My uniform, the physical emblem of discipline, sacrifice, and honor, was reduced to ash in seconds. I stopped fighting my father's grip. I stood still, watching the flames consume what I had built. Then I spoke, my voice level, every word deliberate. "This is the last time any of you touch what is mine." The fire roared. Evelyn smiled. Dylan laughed. My father finally let go of my arm. I walked back inside, shut my bedroom door, and opened my notebook. My hands were steady as I wrote, July 13th, 22. Dylan. Destruction of Class A uniform. Photographs taken. Father. Complicit restraint. Evelyn. Verbal satisfaction observed. The Cold War was over. The hot war had begun. The house was silent when it happened. That heavy, suffocating silence that comes only in the dead hours of night, when even the crickets outside seemed to fall quiet. The ceiling fan above me stirred the humid air but gave no relief. I was lying awake, listening to every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the house, waiting for something I couldn't quite name. Then I heard it. A hiss, low and venomous, seeping through the crack at the bottom of my door. Dylan's voice, slurred by drink, sharpened by hatred. "Think you're somebody now, huh? Little soldier girl?" His words crawled into the room like smoke, and I felt my chest tighten. The doorknob rattled next. Violent, impatient. The sound of metal scraping against its socket. My pulse spiked. Basic training had drilled into me 1,000 responses to threats. Assess, identify, act. But none of them had prepared me for this. Not here. Not in the room where my childhood posters still curled at the corners. The door shuddered as a heavy shoulder slammed into it. Once. Twice. The frame groaned. My breath caught, shallow and fast. I knew what came next even before it happened. The explosion of wood was deafening. The door flew inward, slamming against the wall with a crack that seemed to reverberate through the entire house. Splinters scattered across the floor. Dylan filled the doorway, a hulking silhouette backlit by the hallway light, his face twisted with rage and alcohol. In his hand was a Phillips head screwdriver. The metal glinted under the weak glow of my bedside lamp, and for a second I thought my heart might stop. He charged, unsteady but determined. Training took over. I rolled off the bed, feet hitting the floor hard, adrenaline spiking. He lunged and I sidestepped, trying to catch his wrist in a clamp. The maneuver drilled into me by instructors who had barked the same phrase over and over, control the weapon hand. But Dylan wasn't a sparring partner. He was heavier, clumsier, fueled by blind, drunken rage. My grip broke. He roared, swinging again, the tool slicing through the air where my shoulder had been a heartbeat earlier. My back slammed against the wall. The Andromeda poster I'd had since I was 12 crinkled beneath me. Dead end. The third lunge came fast. Too fast. The screwdriver drove forward, and this time I couldn't move in time. It wasn't a clean slice. It was a crack. A dry, splintering sound that seemed to echo inside my skull. Pain detonated through my body, sharp and blinding, as the shaft punched into my right clavicle. The force pinned me against the wall, the drywall groaning under the impact. A scream tore itself out of me, raw and primal, the kind of sound you don't recognize as your own. For a moment, the pain was everything. White hot, absolute. My knees buckled. My vision swam. Footsteps thundered down the hall. My father appeared first, his face pale in the broken doorway. Evelyn trailed behind, silk robe clutched around her shoulders. Relief surged through me, foolish and desperate. They would help. They had to. But they didn't. Evelyn's lips curved in a smile that didn't belong in that moment. Sweet, slow, poisonous. "Oh, Kenya," she said softly. "Don't be so dramatic." My father sighed, weary and detached. "Her brother's drunk," he muttered, not to me but to Evelyn. She always did love the attention. They stood there watching, as if I were a performance staged for their amusement. Their laughter, soft, dismissive, landed harder than the screwdriver in my shoulder. Something inside me snapped then. Not the bone. That was already broken. Something deeper. The last fragile thread that had tethered me to hope in this family. Through the haze of agony, my left hand fumbled for my phone in the pocket of my pajama pants. My thumb slid across the screen, slick with sweat, tapping out 3 letters. SOS. It wasn't a plea. It was a record. A signal flare shot into the dark. Not help me. Not anymore. Just, I see what you're doing. And this will not vanish. The edges of my vision blurred, the ceiling tilted. The last thing I saw before the blackness claimed me was Evelyn's smile. Satisfied, triumphant, as though my collapse was her victory. When consciousness returned, it was to the sterile brightness of a hospital room. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A steady beeping punctuated the silence. My shoulder was a throbbing inferno, wrapped and immobilized. A thin blanket scratched against my skin. The nurse beside my bed spoke without looking up from the monitor. "Stay still. Rate the pain for me." Her voice was flat, practiced, efficient. 10, I thought, though no number felt big enough. But even as pain pressed in from all sides, I clung to one truth. The notebook in my duffel, the photos already taken, the audio file saved. And now this. ER records stamped with time, date, and injury detail. The evidence was building, piece by piece, page by page. I wasn't just a victim pinned to a wall in my childhood bedroom. I was a soldier with a mission. And this night, this 2 a.m. fracture, wasn't the end. It was the opening salvo. The morphine haze dulled the sharpest edges of the pain, but it couldn't numb the fury. Hours after surgery, lying in that antiseptic cocoon, I forced myself to recount every detail. Not with emotion, but with discipline. Training had taught me that survival isn't about how hard you can hit, but how well you can report. Facts. Time. Sequence. Action. It was the only way to wrestle chaos into something you could use. When my phone buzzed on the tray beside the bed, I didn't need to look at the name. Sergeant Elena Ruiz. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't waste time on sympathy. "Situation report, Private," she said, her voice clipped, military crisp. I exhaled, steadying myself, then spoke into the receiver like I was filing a battlefield update. "Stepbrother Dylan, Phillips screwdriver, entry point, right clavicle through the bone, occurred at 200 hours at my residence. Witnesses, Thomas and Evelyn Mack, my father and stepmother. No intervention. Verbal responses, mockery, dismissal. Recorded SOS at 2:03. hospitalized at 0245, injury documented. There was silence for a beat, then a quiet, approving hum. Good. You've done the hardest part. You've got your ammunition. Her tone shifted, sharper now. But ammunition is useless without a general. I tightened my grip on the phone. Yes, Sergeant. She gave me a name. David Chen, former JAG prosecutor, now running a legal outfit in Austin, Warriors Aegis, a pro bono group that fought for service members caught in personal wars just as brutal as anything overseas. He's smart. He's ruthless. He doesn't lose, Ruiz said flatly. Show him your file. From this point forward, you don't engage the enemy alone. All contact goes through him. Understood? Hooah, I replied, the affirmation catching in my throat but steady enough. 2 days later, in civilian clothes and a stiff sling, I walked into Chen's office. The building was plain brick, the kind most people passed without noticing. Inside, though, the air was heavy with quiet authority. Polished mahogany desks, rows of worn law books, the faint smell of coffee and paper. Chen was smaller than I expected, compact but coiled with energy. His eyes, dark and sharp, seemed to slice through me before I even sat down. He shook my hand firmly, then pointed to the chair opposite his desk. Sergeant Ruiz called ahead. Show me what you've got. I laid it all out in order. The audio recording of Evelyn's venom, the photographs of my desecrated uniform, the casino debt letters in Dylan's name, the bank transfers that bled my paycheck into their accounts. And now the hospital documents. Cold, clinical proof of assault. He studied each piece in silence, his expression unreadable. The audio he replayed twice, head cocked slightly as though weighing every syllable. Finally, he took off his glasses, folded them, and set them on the desk. He leaned forward, fingers steepled. This, he said, is more than enough. The words hit like a release valve. For the first time in months, years, maybe, I felt something close to hope. They are bullies, Chen continued, his tone controlled, deliberate. And bullies only understand a superior show of force. We're not going to file a police report. Not yet. That would scatter them, make them dig in, maybe even destroy evidence. No, we set a trap. A Trojan horse. He laid out the plan with surgical precision. I would call Evelyn. I would act broken, contrite. I would tell her I'd reconsidered, that I was ready to sign papers to leverage my share of the house's equity to help Dylan with his debts. But the signing wouldn't happen at a bank. It would happen here, in Chen's conference room. The bait would be irresistible. Greed, after all, is a leash no manipulator can resist. And once they were inside his office, every lie, every sneer, every betrayal would be turned against them. I listened. My stomach knotted. To face them again, to pretend, to let them believe they were winning, it felt impossible. But then I looked into Chen's hawk-like eyes, unwavering and certain, and I remembered who I was. I wasn't a child pinned to the wall anymore. I was a soldier preparing for an engagement. That night, sitting in my car in the parking lot outside a sterile strip mall, I dialed Evelyn's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice cool and sharp. What do you want, Kenya? I let my breath hitch, faked a tremor in my voice. Mom, I forced out, the word bitter as poison. I've been thinking, you were right. Family is everything. I shouldn't have been so selfish. I'll sign the papers. Silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. Then her voice softened, syrupy sweet. Oh, Kenya, honey. I knew you'd come around. Your father will be so relieved. You've always been a good girl. I added the final line, just as Chen had coached me. My advisor needs to oversee the signing. His office, in Austin. She didn't hesitate. Of course, darling. Whatever you need. When I ended the call, my hand was trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. The trap was set. The war was moving into its next phase. The day of the meeting, I wore my new Class A uniform. Fresh creases, brass polished until it caught the light, boots like mirrors. It wasn't vanity. It was armor. Every stitch and ribbon was proof of survival, of discipline forged in fire. If Dylan thought he could reduce my identity to ash in that backyard, today I would remind him that honor is something no flame can consume. David Chen's conference room wasn't large, but it was perfect for what he called the kill box. A long mahogany table, neutral walls, a single mounted screen. To the untrained eye, it looked like any law office, but every detail was deliberate. In the corner sat a uniformed Austin police officer, her posture relaxed but watchful, hand never far from her holster. By the window stood Mr. Miller, my former neighbor, a retired San Antonio detective with decades of testimony under his belt. Silent, but ready. Chen straightened the stack of papers in front of him with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. "Remember?" he murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. "Don't engage emotionally. Let the evidence speak. Let them hang themselves." I nodded, my hands steady on the table. The door opened, and just like that, the enemy walked into the kill box. Evelyn led the way. Draped in a pastel blouse, her lips stretched in that performative smile she wore at church potlucks and funerals. Dylan swaggered behind her, practically vibrating with anticipation, his grin wide, eyes bloodshot. My father trailed last, gaze averted, moving like a man half asleep. They took their seats opposite me, oblivious to the subtle weight of law and order positioned in the room. Dylan leaned back in his chair, arms spread wide like he was claiming territory. "So where do I sign?" He smirked. "Truck dealerships don't wait forever." Evelyn reached across the table, placing her manicured hand over mine, a grotesque parody of maternal affection. "We're so proud of you, Kenya. I knew you'd do the right thing." I didn't move. I didn't blink. My eyes stayed fixed straight ahead. Chen slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "This," he said smoothly, "is the proposed agreement for leveraging Private Mack's equity." They bent over the page, Dylan squinting, Evelyn's face practically glowing with triumph. For a heartbeat, they believed they'd won. Then Chen's tone shifted, subtle steel threading into his words. "Before we proceed, however, there are supplementary materials that must be entered into the record." He picked up the remote. The screen flickered to life. The first image appeared, a high-resolution photo of my Class A uniform lying crumpled and scorched on the backyard grass. The ribbons melted, brass buttons charred black. Dylan chuckled. "Oh, come on, that was a joke. She's too uptight. Lighten up." Chen ignored him. Click. The next slide showed a scanned letter from L'Auberge Casino in Lake Charles. Dylan's name printed in bold. Amount owed, staggering. The smirk slipped. Click. Bank statements. Wire transfers from my account. Tens of thousands siphoned under duress. My father shifted uncomfortably, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. And then Chen pressed play. Evelyn's voice, venomous and unfiltered, filled the room. "You think you're so much better than us now in your little uniform? Don't forget who raised you. You'll regret being so ungrateful, Kenya. I'll make sure of it." The sweetness drained from her face like blood leaving a wound. She sputtered. That's illegal. You can't record me without permission." Chen leaned back, lips curling into the faintest smile. "Actually, ma'am, Texas is a one-party consent state. Perfectly admissible." The silence cracked. Dylan exploded to his feet, fists slamming the table. "You little bitch. I'll..." "Sit. Down." The officer's command cut through the room like a rifle shot. Her hand rested on her Glock, calm but immovable. Dylan froze. For once, his arrogance found a boundary it couldn't cross. He dropped back into his chair, face purple with rage. Chen let the tension hang a moment longer, then gestured to the man by the window. "And this," he said, "is Mr. Miller. He was your neighbor for 15 years. He is prepared to testify under oath that he witnessed the destruction of Private Mack's uniform and your complicity as spectators. Recognition dawned in Evelyn's and Thomas's eyes. And with it, fear. Real, tangible fear. Chen slid a second document across the table. You have two options. Option 1, I take this file. The photographs, the recordings, the casino debt, and Mr. Miller's testimony. Straight to the district attorney. Dylan faces felony assault and arson. You two face conspiracy and fraud charges. Jail time is almost guaranteed. He tapped the paper. Option 2, you sign this agreement. Effective immediately, you relinquish all claims to the house, transferring the deed entirely to Private Mack. You vacate within 30 days. And you sign a binding no-contact order. You never harass or approach her again. No one spoke. Not even Dylan. The weight of the evidence crushed every ounce of bravado in the room. Evelyn's hand shook as she picked up the pen. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She signed anyway. My father followed, silent and pale, his signature little more than a shaky scrawl. Dylan cursed under his breath, but he too bent over the paper and left his mark. Chen gathered the documents, tapped them neatly into order, and gave me the smallest nod. The war wasn't over, but the field had shifted. The bullies had been dragged out of the shadows and forced to kneel before protocol, evidence, and law. And for the first time, the battlefield felt balanced. 30 days later, I stood at the threshold of my childhood home with a new key in hand. The moving truck had rumbled away that afternoon, taking with it the furniture, the photographs, the curated image Evelyn had so carefully staged for years. The silence inside was absolute. No voices, no mocking laughter, no footsteps on the stairs. Just walls and echoes. I walked through each room like a soldier moving through a cleared building. The living room was bare, save for faint outlines on the walls where picture frames had once hung. Photos of family dinners and holidays that never included me. The dining room table was gone, but I could still see it in my mind. The stage where Evelyn had read my acceptance letter and twisted it into ridicule. When I reached my bedroom, I paused. The drywall still bore the small, jagged scar from Dylan's screwdriver. My hand drifted up, fingers brushing the indentation. It felt smaller than I remembered, less threatening somehow. A reminder, but no longer a wound. The papers Chen secured had given me more than legal ownership. They gave me freedom. Evelyn, Thomas, and Dylan were barred from contact. No calls, no letters, no sudden visits. For the first time in my life, silence belonged to me. But victory never feels the way you imagine. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't cathartic. It was still. A heavy quiet that pressed in from all sides. They were gone, yes, but absence doesn't erase scars. It only leaves room for them to breathe. I found myself in the kitchen, sitting on the floor with my back against the cabinets. That was when the word began to roll through my head. Uninvited. Forgiveness. My grandfather's voice came back, gravelly and warm, reading scripture on his porch in Corpus Christi. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. As a child, I thought it meant excusing cruelty because people didn't understand. Now I knew better. Forgiveness wasn't for the guilty. It was for the survivor. It was the act of cutting the last thread that tied me to them. I took out a pen and a single sheet of paper from the counter drawer. The letter I wrote to my father wasn't long. I didn't accuse. I didn't plead. I told him one truth, that I had spent my whole life trying to earn a single smile, and the night he should have stood between me and danger, he smiled at my attacker instead. I ended with a single line. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I left the letter on the counter. That was my goodbye. Days later, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification, my father's number. I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over delete. Curiosity won. Kenya? Kenny? I got your letter. His voice was cracked, soaked in tears. I was weak, a coward. Evelyn had control. Please, just one more chance. Just one. For a moment, the little girl inside me wanted to believe him, wanted to imagine a father who could finally choose me. But the soldier in me knew better. Weakness might explain actions, but it doesn't excuse them. His apology wasn't for me. It was for himself. Another form of manipulation, wrapped in remorse. I pressed delete, and with it, I chose myself again. The healing didn't come from letters or silence. It came a week later when Ruiz showed up in a pickup with 2 other soldiers from my platoon. They carried toolboxes, paint rollers, and a stack of pizzas. Thought you could use some reinforcements, Private, Ruiz said with a half smile. For the first time, laughter, real, unguarded laughter, echoed through the house. We painted walls, patched holes, filled rooms with noise and camaraderie. Dylan's room became a gym. My father's study turned into a library. With each brushstroke, I reclaimed territory. This was no longer their house. It was mine. That night, sitting on the porch with Ruiz, watching the paint dry and listening to the distant hum of cicadas, I felt something shift. Not victory. Not revenge. Something quieter, sturdier, a foundation. They were gone. But I remained, and that, in the end, was enough. Years have passed since that night. The scar on my shoulder has faded into a pale silver line, but it remains the truest medal I've ever earned. Not handed to me in a ceremony, not pinned on by a general, but forged in fire, betrayal, and survival. I used to see it as shame, a reminder of the night my own family left me pinned to the wall. Now I see it differently. It is my scar of honor. Proof that I was underestimated, betrayed, mocked, and still stood. Proof that survival itself is a kind of quiet victory. My life didn't stop with winning the deed to that house. With the help of David Chen and Warrior's Aegis, I found a new mission. I began speaking to soldiers, recruits, and veterans trapped in private wars just as dangerous as any fought overseas. Battles fought behind closed doors in silence, against the people they should have been able to trust. We built a program called Operation Open Eyes, designed to give service members the resources, legal guidance, and voice I had once been desperate for. And every time I stood in front of a room full of new recruits, nervous, sharp-eyed, trying not to show fear, I remembered what it felt like to be in their boots. The exhaustion, the doubts, the ghosts that follow you from home. I told them my story not to inspire pity, but to show them something undeniable. Dignity doesn't expire, and silence is never the end. One of my last talks was at Fort Jackson, the very place I nearly broke during training. Hundreds of recruits sat before me. Their faces reminded me of my own when I first arrived, equal parts pride, fear, and a question mark about whether they truly belonged. I raised my hand and touched the scar through the fabric of my blouse. They tried to pin me down with violence. They tried to erase me with words. They tried to reduce me to ashes. My voice was steady, amplified in the silence of the auditorium. But scars don't just mark pain. They mark survival. And survival is the most unshakable form of strength you'll ever carry. I leaned forward, dropping my voice lower, speaking to each face as if we were alone. If you are hearing this, and you feel pinned down right now, by doubt, by family, by ghosts you brought with you, you need to know one thing. You are not fighting alone. Someone will see your signal. Someone will answer. That is the truth I carry now. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Dignity doesn't mean silence. Respect in the military or in life should be given freely. But when it isn't, the quiet competence of those underestimated becomes its own kind of weapon. So I'll leave you with this. Have you ever seen someone underestimated until the truth came out? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your stories. Hit like if this one stayed with you, and subscribe to join us here at Echoes of Revenge, where we share new stories of quiet strength and justice every single day. And if you believe in respect, discipline, and the dignity of standing tall even after being knocked down, then you belong here. Because the truth is simple. Bullies don't last. but scars and the strength behind them echo forever.